Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today we'll be taking a look at the Darkstar Assault Rifle, which is a Directive Reward available to the VS Combat Medic. We'll be going over the weapon's specific stats, how to use it effectively, and whether or not the weapon will suit your individual playstyle. Being a Directive Reward, it's going to require you to have an Auraxium medal on at least 5 of your assault rifles, after which you'll be rewarded the Darkstar. You can't buy this weapon with certs, you can't buy it with station cash, and I was fortunate enough to be gifted all the directive weapons so that I could share these reviews with all of you. The Darkstar is based on your default Pulsar, which has relatively low damage when you compare it to other starting assault rifles in the game, but it is very accurate and the Darkstar follows suit. The standout feature of the Darkstar is that it uses a heat mechanic instead of ammo, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Like the Pulsar, the Darkstar deals 143 damage up to 10 meters and drops off to 125 damage over 65 meters. That's 1 tier of damage fall off, which equates to 7 shots to kill up to 10 meters and 8 shots to kill anywhere beyond that. With headshots, a kill requires 4 of them at all ranges. The Darkstar fires at 698 rounds per minute, or 11.63 rounds per second, which, given the weapon's damage output, gives you a theoretical time to kill of 0.52 seconds within 10 meters, and about 0.6 seconds beyond that. And by theoretical, I'm talking about as if the bullet travel were instant, all shots are landing on the chest, and it's against a target that doesn't have an overshield or nanoweave armor. If you go purely for headshots, that theoretical time to kill is cut down to 0.26 seconds, at all ranges. So the really cool thing about the Darkstar and some other VS directive weapons is that it uses a heat mechanic instead of ammunition. Much like a repair tool, the weapon is going to start to overheat as you fire it, and then it will cool off when you're not firing it. The weapon cannot be reloaded manually, and you have to let it cool down. Fortunately, the weapon will also cool down when it's not equipped. So if you do end up overheating it, you can switch over to your secondary or your C4 or your medkit, and ta-da, you come back to a weapon that's completely good to go. No reloading, no chambering, it's just there for you. This is an extremely powerful mechanic, I can't stress that enough. Super powerful, especially for people who like to run and gun. As far as the magazine size goes, the Darkstar can fire 32 shots in a row before completely overheating. When it is completely overheated, the weapon is going to take 3.2 seconds to cool all the way back down to 0, because there seems to be about a 1.6 second delay before the weapon actually starts the cooldown process, and then after that there's another 1.6 seconds before the weapon actually becomes completely cool. Now, when the weapon is not completely overheated, the delay is only about 0.4 seconds, and it'll take you roughly 1.5 seconds to cool down after that, so only about 1.9 seconds grand total for reload time. Granted, you are firing 1 less round in total in these calculations. We can consider the overheat and the non-overheat as the weapon's long and short reloads. As long as you haven't emptied your magazine, you'll trigger the short reload of 1.9 seconds, but if it's completely overheated, it's the long reload of 3.2 seconds. This is not what the weapon statistics say in the game, those are wrong, do not listen to them. When the weapon itself is cooling down, so after that short delay, you're regaining about 20 rounds back per second, which is pretty crazy. Very low downtime overall. By comparison, the standard Pulsar has 30 rounds per magazine and 180 in reserve. It also has a 1.75 second short reload and a 2.2 second long reload. In my opinion, the benefit of the heat mechanic far outweighs the detriments, so long as you can keep it from overheating. But what about the rest of the attributes, right? Well, the Darkstar has a projectile velocity of 615 meters per second, which is slightly above average for assault rifles in general, and it's the same as the Pulsars. The weapon's recoil pattern is up and to the right, same as the Pulsars, and it'll likely have a vertical recoil of 0.187 and a first shot recoil of 0.514, a horizontal recoil of 0.16, and a recoil angle from 12.75 to 15 degrees, which would mean a variance of 2.25 degrees. These are not the values that you're going to find in the spreadsheet, because the spreadsheet seems to be outdated since the August patch of last year. That patch removed high velocity ammo from the weapon, and it brought in the recoil angles a little bit as well. So these calculations are based on a compensator's normal 15% reduction to vertical recoil applied to the standard Pulsar's 0.22 vertical recoil. That said, as far as recoil goes, it's above average. It's not mind-blowingly amazing, but it is pretty decent past the first shot, thanks to the low sustained vertical recoil. As we just mentioned, the Darkstar has a built-in forward grip and a built-in compensator, and the Pulsar has access to a forward grip but does not have access to a compensator. So for all intents and purposes, the Darkstar is always going to be slightly more accurate in the recoil department. As far as cone of fire goes, the Darkstar's hip fire is worse than the Pulsar's because of the compensator, and you also won't have access to a laser sight either. While aiming down sights, its standing accuracy is 0.1, its moving accuracy is 0.25, and the bloom is 0.05. From the hip, your standing accuracy is 2.4, your moving accuracy is 3, and your bloom is 0.1. So if you sum up all the weapon's characteristics, what you basically have is an aim down sights weapon that's good at sustaining burst fire from mid-range. And even though the first shot recoil is decently high, the weapon is still controllable thanks to the subsequent vertical recoil, which makes it easy to land headshots inside the weapon's effective range. As far as attachments go, all directive weapons come with them built right in, except for these scopes, which can be interchanged. As we mentioned earlier, those attachments are a compensator and a forward grip, and it used to have high velocity ammo, but fortunately they did take that away, as it just made the weapon worse overall. For scopes, I would recommend either a 1x or a 2x reflex, as that fits the weapon's effective range, and it's not so accurate that the higher range optic will help you out too much. When it comes to making the most out of the Darkstar, here are some things you can think about. The first is to just try not to overheat it. Remember that there is a delay before the weapon starts cooling down, and that delay is much longer if it is completely overheated. On top of that, the weapon's design lends itself to bursting anyway, so you should try to stay around 6 to 12 shots and then let the thing cool off for a bit. Obviously, the bursts are smaller if you're more accurate or have a range advantage, and larger if you're trying to deal with somebody who's a bit too close. And that brings me to the next tip, which is to keep your distance. It's really easy to overheat the weapon or die when you're in a frantic close quarters environment, and the weapon doesn't have the rate of fire and the damage per magazine to carry you in those types of situations either. So keeping around 20 meters between you and the bad guys is a good way to get a feel for what the weapon is and isn't capable of, and it'll also help keep you safe if you do end up overheating the weapon. We kinda mentioned this earlier, but make it a point to go for headshots. The first shot recoil is pretty pronounced, so it wouldn't be a stretch to say that you should aim for the upper chest or the throat, and then you let the second shot kick up into the head, but at 698 rounds per minute, that firing rate is pretty smooth. It's not going to jump as hard as a slower rate of fire weapon, and it's also not so fast that you'll end up missing a bunch of shots before you can correct your aim. So going for the head on the first shot and then just compensating for it afterwards is more than viable, and that's how I tend to use it. Lastly, this is a great hide-and-seek weapon. Between the decent accuracy and the heat mechanic, it's very rewarding to pop out of cover, fire off a burst, and then you hide again. By the time you pop back out, you've already regained some ammo in your magazine, which makes the weapon very sustainable, and if the opportunity presents itself, it's even possible to catch enemies in the middle of a reload. If you want to see what I mean by hide-and-seek, I've got an older kill streak using the Darkstar that I'll link in the video description. Overall, the Darkstar is good at what it does. It's a slightly more accurate aim-down sights version of your standard Pulsar, made for mid-range engagements. And much like the Pulsar, the damage output is not amazing, but the heat mechanic creates a lot of opportunities for you during play. Not to mention, you won't be tethered to an engineer's ammo pack at any point. If you're planning on grinding out this directive, the 5 weapons that I think you'll find the easiest to Auraxium will be the Pulsar itself, the Corvus, the NS11A, the HV45, and your Terminus VX9. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you've already unlocked the Darkstar, I'm curious to hear what you think about it. Would you or would you not recommend grinding it out? How has it performed for you? And how does it compare to alternatives? Go ahead and share those thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.